What if one decision you make this year could still be feeding your family 20 years from now? The average household will spend over $200,000 on groceries in a lifetime, yet none of that money builds anything that lasts. It disappears week after week, exchanged for food that's gone in days, leaving nothing behind except another receipt and another trip back to the store. Most people never question this cycle because they've been taught to treat gardening like a seasonal activity instead of designing it as a system. So every spring they start again from zero, growing little food and remain completely dependent on stores. But food was never meant to work that way. Even a small backyard can be designed to act less like a hobby and more like an engine, something you build once and allow to keep producing for decades because the goal isn't a bigger garden, it's a smarter one. Most people believe they're moving towards self-sufficiency when they plant a few vegetables in spring, harvest for a few weeks in summer, and then pull everything out when the season ends, but nothing about that routine actually changes where their food comes from. By autumn, the beds are empty again, the last tomato has been picked, and the yard goes quiet while the grocery bills continue as if nothing was ever grown at all, and many families don't realize that even a modest garden can cost a few $100s each year just to restart with new seeds, soil amendments, and supplies. The next spring, they're right back where they started buying seeds again, preparing soil again, repeating the same work just to get the same short-term result. That isn't a food system, it's a reset button. And pressing that reset year after year is why so many gardens never become more than temporary projects. Families still walk into stores every single week, trading hours of their lives for food that disappears in days, never building anything that continues working once the harvest is over. Annual vegetables alone can't break that pattern because they require constant replanting, constant spending, and constant attention just to maintain output, while the most dependable food sources in nature don't behave that way at all. Trees, vines, bushes, and perennial crops establish themselves once and then return on their own, producing more reliably each year without being started over. If you want a backyard that truly feeds you, the objective isn't to plant a little more every spring, it's to stop restarting and begin building something that strengthens with time, something that keeps growing, producing, and compounding long after a single season ends. The biggest change you can make in your garden isn't planting more vegetables or buying better tools, it's changing the way you think about time. Most people plant with a 3-month mindset, focusing only on what they'll harvest this season instead of what their yard could be producing 10 or 20 years from now. And that short timeline is what keeps gardens small and dependent on constant effort. Annual crops like tomatoes, lettuce, and beans are valuable, but they only feed you once you plant them, harvest them, and then they're gone, sending you back to the beginning again next year. Perennial crops change that equation completely because they are planted once and then keep producing on their own, often increasing their yield as they mature. So a single fruit tree can eventually provide dozens, even hundreds of pounds of food every season while berry bushes continue returning harvests for well over a decade. These plants don't ask you to restart, they quietly build momentum. The first few years are about establishing that foundation, not chasing instant results, which is why many people give up too early, because real food systems grow the same way orchards grow. Slow at first, then suddenly reliable, abundant, and far less demanding. Once those plants take hold, you're no longer replanting your food every year, you're managing something that improves with time, shifting from gardening like you're renting your food to building an asset that keeps paying you back season after season. Once you shift to thinking long-term, the next step is to design your space like a system instead of filling it with random seasonal beds. You begin by placing what can be called your backbone crops, the plants that will still be producing years from now. Fruit trees in the sunniest areas, berry bushes along edges or fences, and vines trained to grow vertically so they use space most gardens leave empty. At first, they may look small, but year by year they quietly turn ordinary lawn into permanent food, producing ground. While they are getting established, the open space between them is used for fast, growing annual vegetables like beans, greens, squash, potatoes, and tomatoes, so you're harvesting food almost right away while the long-term plants prepare future harvests. This means the same space is working on two timelines at once, giving you meals this season while setting up crops that may produce for the next 10, 15, or even 20 years. Instead of rebuilding your garden every spring, you are layering production, adding pieces that continue working long after they're planted. So each year the space feeds you a little more and asks a little less in return. As the structure of your garden takes shape, the next goal is to make it support itself so it no longer depends on constant inputs from you. Instead of buying fertilizers and soil amendments every season, you begin creating fertility right at home by returning organic matter back to the ground through simple composting kitchen scraps. Leaves and yard waste gradually breaking down into rich material that feeds the soil naturally. What once had to be purchased is now created on site, and over time the soil becomes darker, softer, and easier to work with, holding moisture longer so plants need less watering and far less intervention to stay productive. At the same time, capturing rainwater from a roof into a simple barrel allows you to store what nature already provides, turning every storm into a reserve that carries the garden through dry weeks without relying entirely on hoses. As these small loops connect, the system begins to close in on itself. Waste becomes input, input becomes growth, and the garden starts behaving less like a project you must manage and more like something that quietly runs in the background. Effort goes down while production goes up, and what once felt like seasonal labor begins to resemble a steady, reliable cycle that strengthens with each passing year. Over time, this kind of garden begins to change not just how your yard looks, but how it functions in your life, because it no longer resets each season and instead keeps building on what was planted years before. The trees return each spring stronger than the last, berry bushes expand their harvests, and the soil grows richer instead of being exhausted, creating a rhythm where production becomes more dependable with less effort. What once started as a few small plantings gradually turns into a steady source of food that shows up year after year, softening the impact of rising prices and reducing how often you need to rely completely on stores. Instead of beginning from scratch each season, you are continuing something already established, something quietly working whether you are thinking about it or not. And that's the real shift. This isn't about growing more food this summer. It's about planting something today that will still be feeding you years from now. Because food doesn't always have to be bought, it can be built.